the world's looking towards China for, I think, a bit more than just economic leadership at this time, where Western sort of moral leadership is under question. Don't you think that China needs to be a bit more honest with how it kind of looks at itself now with regards to these human rights atrocities?
Absolutely not. While I have full respect for you, I completely disagree with the premise of your question. Let's talk about that one by one. Taiwan's status is written in history. It's carved in stone. Read the Cairo Declaration and the Potsdam Proclamation, which dictated that Japan, which was occupying Taiwan at the time before 1945, need to unconditionally surrender Taiwan back to China. So Taiwan is part of China, written into history, carved in stone. No one can change that. And whatever that happens across the Taiwan Strait will be solved domestically as an internal matter, rather than, for example, as described by some other countries, one country invading another country. And allow me to emphasize, the unification of China will take place during the lifetime of most of your viewers. Don't pretend to be surprised if one day Taiwan and mainland China are reunited peacefully, hopefully, but non-peacefully if it has to be, because we need to really guard against the urges of the separatists in Taiwan, as well as some foreign countries which want to push for the separation of Taiwan from mainland China. You talked about Tibet. Tibet is part of China. There is no single country in the world of today which recognizes the independence of Tibet. Remember that. So whatever problems there are in Tibet are purely China's domestic issues, and I'm pretty sure that China can solve whatever problems there are in Tibet peacefully for the benefit of everyone living in Tibet. So don't imagine Tibet as if it is a separate country. It will never be a separate country. There will never be a Republic of Tibet, for example. Tibet will always remain part of China. You mentioned Xinjiang and the Uyghurs. The Uyghurs are brothers and sisters. They are only one of the 56 ethnic groups in China. And in China, we emphasize that all ethnic groups, big or small, large or small, need to be treated as an equal. So the Uyghurs enjoy full rights with all the other 55 ethnic groups. That's number one. Number two is that, yes, indeed, there are some terrorists, especially involving the Uyghurs. Do you know what's their real goal? Their real goal is to separate Xinjiang away from China, to establish a kind of what they call East Turkmenistan Caliphate in Xinjiang. Now, let me tell you, this will never be possible. It's dead before it is put onto the table. China will never allow Xinjiang to be separated away from China to become a so-called separate country or independent country. So it's not a human rights issue. It is whether you abide by the Chinese law, which dictates that no one in China should ever indulge in any activity which may be aimed at separation of any part of China away from China. So when you talk about the Uyghurs or some of the issues involved in Xinjiang, it's not a human rights issue. It is, if it ever exists, whether there are people with the aid and abetting of foreign forces which want to separate Xinjiang away from China. So let's be honest. Let's
Victor, okay, let's be honest, right? I mean, how can you say it's not a human rights issue? Let's also, I mean, I've given you a long time to speak, so let's try to break all of those things down. So with Taiwan, I mean, it sounded like you were saying if Taiwan can't be, reunited with China in a peaceful way, then we will create war and we'll conquer it. It just frankly sounded like that. With Tibet, now, irrespective of if Tibet belongs to China or does not belong to China, or is recognized by China or not recognized by the rest of the world as an independent country or not, or even irrespective of if the majority of Tibetans want to be part of China or not, right? The bottom line is, in 75 years of history, 6,000 monasteries have been destroyed and about 1.2 million Tibetans have been killed. This is more people that have been killed in Tibet than Palestinians by Israel. This is a big deal. Right, and in terms of managing what you call the separatist movement in Xinjiang, wouldn't a better way be to sort of put out an olive branch and allow people their identity, allow people their ideas, and sort of allow the people in Xinjiang to be part of this amazing sort of economic development that has been through China. Instead of sort of alienating them, calling them terrorists, which honestly just sounds like something out of a Washington playbook and an Israeli playbook, and it's like it's typical empire thinking and imperial thinking. There's terrorists out there. They're trying to assert independence, and we're going to go and crush them. Aren't there better ways? I mean, for China to think about these issues than we are one China, and we will suppress anything that we think is not sort of aligning with that policy.
Again, with due respect to you, let me differ with you in very significant ways. And let's talk about what you mentioned in three categories, one by one. Taiwan. Taiwan will never be able to be an independent country. And if you do not believe me, just look at what former President Abraham Lincoln did to the Confederation after they declared independence from the Union. President Lincoln launched a war to reclaim the southern states and to force them back into the Confederation. It is not war of aggression. It is not war of occupation of another country. It is the justified war of reunification of the United States to such an extent that ever since the Civil War, the United States has been one nation under God, indivisible. Indivisible. No state can ever declare separation from the Union, because even if, let's say, 100% of the people in California want to be independent, that will not turn California into an independent state, because you need to go through a very complicated, almost a very impossible process to make sure that any single state will be able to be independent from the Union. Now, if the United States is one country, indivisible, why should you ever expect that China should be one country divisible? China will never be divisible. China will never allow any division of any part of its territory from China, whether it is Taiwan or Tibet or Xinjiang. Talked about Tibet. Tibet is very different. Tibet practiced Tibetan Buddhism. Most of the Chinese people, we follow Chinese Buddhism. Now, Tibetan Buddhism, Chinese Buddhism are very more common rather than different. And many people, including me, I go to Tibetan temples to worship, actually. In addition to the Chinese Buddhist temples, we have no problem in embracing each other, not only as brothers and sisters, but also the believers in the same faith of Buddhism. So what is wrong between China and Tibet, or the Han Chinese people like me with Tibetan brothers and sisters? We don't have fundamental problems. I think the problem, if any, was that some forces back in the 1950s wanted to really urge some ruling classes in Tibet try to break away from China. It stopped in 1959. It will never be allowed to resurrect, for example, and anyone inside China or outside China promoting or advocating for the independence of Tibet will be mooted before they really come into...
What does muted mean?
Pardon me?
You said they'll be muted. What does muted mean?
Muted mean they will never carry any weight. They can talk about it.
It also means that people are also muted by...
They can never really create a ripple in China. They can never create any ripple.
But Victor, muted has also traditionally meant being disappeared, being killed, being imprisoned, being tortured. Muted also meant that, right? And is that really the best way to deal with these issues?
Well, I think you can indulge in all these false accusations, but you need to come up with real evidence. If you can come up with
there's been reports after reports for decades.
Now, I can help you to clarify that. But if you cannot come up with real evidence,
Victor,
false accusation,
Victor, you see, I think
satisfying the burden of proof is not a worthwhile thing to be engaged in.
No, look, I think we're trying to have an honest discussion, and I do think that there's so much that the world can understand from China and learn from China and appreciate China, right? But I mean, the premise of that is that both parties kind of have to be looking honest at themselves. And obviously, I'm just having a conversation with you, not representing the world or anything of that sort, but just try to help me understand, right? So I've read report after report from independent organizations whose reporting I trust when it comes to them reporting about Abu Ghraib or Guantanamo Bay or Israel, Palestine, or even in South Africa, anywhere. I trust their reporting, right? I do look at their reporting. I've been doing it for 20 years. I do approach it critically, but I trust their reporting. So those same organizations, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, there are others, say that horrible things have been happening historically, and presently, extremely horrible things are happening in Xinjiang and have been occurring for the last 7 or 8 years, right? Now, I think there's a way to approach it to say nothing bad is happening, and no one's going to take that seriously. Right? I mean, no one who's looking at this from the outside is going to say nothing bad's happening. Maybe try to contextualize it. Maybe try to say there are better approaches. Maybe the Chinese state have not dealt with this in the smartest way, and the world is changing. I mean, but just denial is just it's gonna create mistrust, because I think the world is looking for China, towards China as an entity that they want to trust, because there is a lot of there's a lack of moral leadership in the world right now. What's your response to that?
Sir, it is not denial. It is reinformation of the realities on the ground.
So may I ask you? Okay.
Believe what I do. If you do not believe what I tell you, then try to figure out how to go to Xinjiang for a real visit.
When people
by yourself, I'll be very happy to help you if you really want to do.
Would I really be able to go to Xinjiang or send teams to people of Xinjiang and without interference of the Chinese government and no minders? I mean, this is the conversation that you've had many times, and it's always the same retort.
No, allow me to mention, if you do visit Xinjiang, your mind will be blown away. You will see a completely different Xinjiang than what you prejudiced against. People in Xinjiang live in harmony, and most of the people there are very, very eager to support the government's policy against terrorism.
Would you deny that hundreds of thousands of people, if we use the lowest estimates, have been put in detention camps?
How can that be possible?
The state, the Chinese officials who run the state have said that. They've said we've interned 540,000 people, not Human Rights Watch. The Chinese state officials who manage the state, this is their number. 540,000 people have put in internment camps.
No. You misread the Chinese reports. You need to do better homework. And I hope you will apply a lot of scholarship and seriousness and professionalism in whatever data you read about. And I can assure you, with all my sincerity and professionalism and academic achievements, that what you mentioned is completely against the realities on the ground.
I wish one day I can visit Xinjiang, and I'd like to understand the truth.
So. Sooner the better.
But I do think 100%, I agree. Sooner the better. I do think we're not gonna be. I mean, we're definitely not gonna agree on this. But just when it comes to Human Rights Watch and their reports and Amnesty International's reports, do you believe their reports on Gaza? Do you believe their reports in other places of the world? What's your thoughts on Israel's atrocities in Gaza?
I would say, when you talk about Israelis versus the Palestinian people, keep in your mind, China is the fiercest defender of the legitimate rights of the Palestinian people. Now, that should help you to better understand China's position in Xinjiang. Xinjiang is part of China. Israel or Palestine are separate, away from China. But the same philosophy applies, because China respects the people of faith who are believers in Muslim and Islam. We treat them with equality and we support them as much as we can. Look at China-Pakistani friendship. Look at what the Pakistani people achieved in their recent air war against India. China has no reservation in sharing its best weapons with the Pakistani people, and only with such unconditional support from China for Pakistan, which is one of the largest Muslim populations in the world, that Pakistan can survive and fully protect its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Now, these are convincing examples to show that China is not an enemy of the Muslim world or the Islamic world. China is the best friend of the Muslim world. China cares about the fundamental interests of the people who are Muslims in the world, both outside of China as well as inside China.
There's a few things that you mentioned. On the Palestine thing, yes, we've heard the Chinese sort of sentiment that they're behind the Palestinians, and you've articulated it very well here. Do you think, though, that the Chinese government could have done more? I mean, in the last 19 months of genocide, China, as you mentioned, has the second biggest army in the world. I'm not asking for military intervention. That will probably just bring more violence. But do you think they could have done more? Sort of, I mean, it's really difficult to imagine a future for Gaza, irrespective of if Netanyahu stays there, if he moves out, if whatever occurs. I mean, just how it's going to be reconstructed, if it ever will be reconstructed. It's very difficult to imagine what will happen there. And I understand that that's not your government's doing. That's the US funding Israel. But do you think China could have done more? Secondly, absolutely, China has a lot of friendly relations with many Muslim countries. But I think the issue in Xinjiang is not. It's about identity suppression, and it's about what you say are thoughts of terrorism and separatism. And that's sort of the clash, right? And there seems to be this. China behaves with extreme. Really brutally and very, very sort of black and white when it comes to suppression of internal state affairs or identity of what the state should be or what you call the one China policy. And from a foreign policy perspective, absolutely, China is flexible, they're malleable, they want to kind of see the world prosper through, obviously they want to benefit, but it's kind of a win-win relationship. And that's not what we're kind of contesting. But again, don't you think some of those amazing tools that the Chinese government uses when conducting foreign policy can sometimes be used to think about the people inside of China or everyone inside of China, what you call sort of Greater China, and just sort of deal with that in a more diplomatic, smart, friendly way where people are given, the freedom to sort of cultivate their identity and not be forced to sort of have some sort of loyalty which the state is defined.
Well, you raised two important questions. Let me address them separately. The first one is about Israel and Gaza and the U.S. role in supporting Israel, committing all these atrocities against innocent people in Gaza. I think from the Chinese perspective, as I mentioned, China fiercely condemns atrocities committed by Israel against Israeli Palestinian innocent people in Gaza, especially the wanton, indiscriminate killing of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Now, we all know for sure that the Israeli government's ultimate goal is to seize the land of Gaza, try to drive out the Palestinian people from Gaza. This probably will be ethnic cleansing. This probably will be considered as crimes against humanity. And China, as a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations and a very important member of the United Nations General Assembly, will do whatever is necessary to rally political forces to condemn the Israeli atrocity against the people in Gaza and to protect the sovereignty and the integrity of the Palestine state. China has called on many occasions for full recognition of the United Nations for the state of Palestine, and China will never stop before this goal is fully achieved. Now, on the situation in Xinjiang, as I mentioned, what it boils down is if you are a Chinese citizen, including the Uyghurs, you need to abide by the Chinese law. And the Chinese law says there is only one China and no one in China is allowed to violate the Chinese law.
But do you think it's realistic to believe that
away from China? So you need to abide by the Chinese law. You cannot abide by the American law or by the British law or by the French law.
Victor,
you need to, as a Chinese citizen, abide by the law of China without violating China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. If you dare to violate China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, you are a criminal, deserving to be punished by law after a due process, of course.
Victor,
so
it sounds like
confound the violation of law with
Victor,
rights issues.
It sounds like this is a circular discussion. I keep on saying that all the 540 minimum that the Chinese government
came up with a number. Did you count?
Right? Okay, irrespective, 100,000, 200,000, 3 million.
Did you count whether it's 10,000, 100,000?
It's definitely not 10,000. Have you employed an auditor to account? I mean, I don't. We go on reports, and we've spoken to many Uyghur people who are now in London. Previously, in other parts of the world where I've reported, we've spoken to Uyghur people where we have their accounts, and we're not going to agree on the numbers. And I think it's fine that we don't agree on those numbers, and we are not going to agree that everyone who's locked up is a separatist, who is militant, or is not just someone who's necessarily just trying to practice their be faithful to their identity, whatever that identity may be. It's just that, and I think this is the crux of the issue, is that there's so much good to be seen in China. It's really done amazing strides in terms of economic development. It hasn't been in the last 50 years a massive. In fact, throughout its history, it hasn't really been an imperial force in terms of going elsewhere to other continents and colonizing. But I guess, and this is what I'm trying to understand. I'm trying to understand that there are ideas of representation which are beyond what a liberal democracy is, right? But that doesn't mean representation isn't important. And I think that's something that China is maybe still grasping, but it does probably grasp. And I do think there's unfair criticism behind understanding how the Chinese represent themselves, because the values in Western societies about liberal democracy are maybe don't translate. And that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It just means it's kind of different.